Michael Lewis at the university, now 4 years ago, I think it was. And it was the last course he taught, and it was called People in Landscapes, or Landscapes with People in Them, or something. And ordinarily, I'm in no hurry to take another course, but that really turned my crank. I loved it. And it's made me try to put more people into pictures. And here's one I did that year. Now that railroad is the New Haven Railroad at Stonington, Connecticut, which is a town I used to live in summers. And these figures are two boys I saw in Costa Rica waiting for a bus and playing with their cell phones. And I loved the way their knees and arms were all wound up together. So I had a space in this picture, and I put them in there. I don't know if they're too far out of context or not, but that was the kind of thing I did in his class and had an awful lot of fun doing. I just discovered a new tube of paint, a new color. I mean, I've heard of it before, but I never bought one. Davies Gray. I love it.
So can you explain your process here for me?
Well, I draw first. I'm a line person, and the transition from line into color sometimes is difficult, and sometimes I have no idea where I'm going with the color, because if I try to just copy nature, it gets boring fast. And since I'm not the almighty, I don't know, I don't have a brush like his, hers, or its. But be that as it may, there's sort of a hiatus in every artwork I do that goes into color, but then gradually it starts happening. One thing leads to another. Now these are upside down because if I leave the room for a while and then come back and see them across the room, I see right away what I've got to do next. Sitting up close to them, and if they're upside down, I'm not worried about subject matter. Once I start worrying about subject matter, the thing falls into a certain category of gentle boredom, and it's been a gradual process through my life of shaking off the dependence on realism. I'm sure it is with just about every artist in one way or another. They say that kids, when they turn about 8 or 9, a lot of them who love painting and drawing just lose interest in it at that point and don't really ever get back to it. But I think what happens then is that their brains get more realistic and they realize what they're doing has nothing to do with realism. It always amazes me too how so many artists have struggled to render 3 dimensions on a 2-dimensional surface. I mean, that's classic painting. And I just don't find it very interesting to do that. Maybe if I were a man, I'd want to give the painting all kinds of bulges, but I don't, not really. Perspective, though, is fun to bring space into it. That's about the only tool I have for making it solid looking. Well, you're going to have to ask more questions. I got sidetracked.
That's all right. So you said that sometimes when you go out of the room after you've turned, you turn them upside down to see what
needs doing, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I can see, I mean, I used to do a painting in a day, but they weren't, that was when I was young. These I love to futz around for a month or more. Sometimes I've saved up a whole lot of bad ones that never quite made it. And once in a while, I'll take a new look at it and bang, I know how to fix it. Other people have said, oh, you don't want to do that, it'll ruin them. You know, people when they get old, they do that. They keep trying to correct their work. And that's true, you have to watch out for that. But I'm still finding out how I really want it and how I want to do it. Whew, the stairs.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what's going on up here, basically. But the past year, with my husband being so sick, I couldn't focus on it. Even if I had time to come up here, my mind wasn't up here.
So this is a sort of a beginning again?
Yeah. I went to Eastport I was there 2 weeks, and just relaxing. I did some writing and thinking about painting, and Sherry and I went to Machias a couple of times, and she came over and we saw a movie and we talked about her painting and my painting, and suddenly it kind of clicked in. It's not all that hard to get into that other space, but when you're not in it, it's very hard to get into it. It either happens or it doesn't sometimes. That said, about trying to stay away from realism, of course, it starts usually with something you've seen that excites you. And this one is this fantastic mill with silos and stuff up in Exeter. And Helena said, oh, that looks like a lot of erector sets. I said, that's exactly what it looks like. And it's an awful lot of sky, which instead of just painting it blue or even shades of blue, sometimes if I look at a beautiful clear sky like that, it starts to vibrate. And other times, of course, there's elegant clouds going by, but so I have fun with them. This one was done in Newton, Massachusetts. It's on Armory Street. And here's this armory, old-fashioned kind of armory. And on the other side, down in the corner, is the Golden Age Center. It's a home for the elderly, mostly where they go to die because they're mostly bedridden. And I had a dear friend who was in there. It was sort of the final destination of her long downward fight with bipolar and different other mental illnesses that they weren't able to figure out. But I went to visit her there, and the last thing she said to me was, I've got to get out of here. And so very soon she died. But I had done this sketch, just a pencil sketch, when I was down there, because I thought it interested me anyway, because of its perversity. Here's this great pile of brick that was built for young men to learn to kill in, and the other little so-called cheerful place down the street is for old people to be resuscitated ad nauseum when they've been much happier dead. But there was a little yard man, a little workman coming down the road from the Golden Age Center, and I said, that's my friend Annie escaping at last, in disguise. That's what that's all about. Lighthearted ones I did from old sketches I had done on a trip in 2000. I was in New Haven, Connecticut, walking around because it's my old hometown. But I went into parts of town that I didn't live in, which were fairly staid and boring. But I call that one the New Haven chicken, because somebody had these wonderful chickens running around their yard, and tent-topped enclosures, and just stuff in their yard. And that came out better than just about anything. I'm so tickled with that. It's just gaga. Anyway, it's called the New Haven chicken.
So when did you first want to be an artist?
Well, I always drew ever since I can remember, and to keep me quiet, it was a wonderful way to keep me quiet. My mother, got crayons and papers, always had them for us. And when I was 7, I had a new baby sister. I'd been the young one, and then suddenly this baby comes along, and there was a sidewalk in front of our house in New Haven that ran along Whitney Avenue, and I had a best friend that lived in the next block down on that same avenue. But between her house and mine, there was a little group of stores, a little sort of 1920s, 4 little stores, a drugstore, a grocery store, beauty parlor, and a dry cleaner, and they all had this kind of trying to look like a Turkish bazaar architecture. And a very handsome man was coming out of the grocery store. And I was 7, and I was on the street, and basically nothing was happening at home that included me right then. And maybe I was jealous. I don't remember feeling jealous, but kids, when the next one comes along, do go through some kind of change. I'm just trying to excuse myself. But I saw this man and I said, "Penis." And he looked like someone had given him an electric shock. And he said, "Where do you live?" And I thought, uh-oh, I said a naughty word and he's going to tell on me. So I told him the wrong address. I said, "Oh, up on St. Ronan Street, that brown house up there," which was a lie. There was a brown house up there, but he was a lot smarter than I thought. I always thought I got away with that one, but my mother told me years later that this man had been very distressed at what I'd said to him on the street, and he thought I might get into serious trouble if I said that to the wrong person, which I didn't have any idea about, but he went to the school and told them what had happened, and they figured out quite quickly who lived right down that neighborhood and who was that kind of crazy kid. So my mother was told to go to a child psychiatrist. They didn't take me there. They should have, of course. I really needed a little help with my head, but in those days, those things were between grown-ups. But the psychiatrist said, "Well, your child wants more attention, and she should be kept at home more and not just encouraged to go wander in the street. What does she like to do at home?" And my mother said, "Well, she loves to draw." And the psychiatrist said, "Give her all the encouragement, the art materials, everything that will keep her happy doing that." So that's how it evolved, because I said penis to a man on the street. And so I would get home from school and I'd go right up to my room. I'd get tea and cookies, mountains of cookies, because my best friend had just moved away at that point. So I just sat in my room and drank tea and ate cookies. When she still lived on that street, I didn't get in any more trouble. We used to wander around, make maps of the different people's properties, and my grandfather's house was up behind some apartments, and we'd go up in his yard and play and all this. But after she was gone, I would sit up in my room after school and had no interest in doing homework at all. But I would draw, listen to the radio, because there wasn't TV then. I'd listen to the Lone Ranger and all those things, and draw and draw and draw. And that's how it got started.
So did your parents support you after that or did you decide to go to art school or anything? Or?
Well, There was adolescence between then, and that was awful because I didn't get another best friend. All the other girls in my class lived out in the suburbs. And when Phoebe's family moved, she was my best friend. And we had all these marvelous games we played, imaginary games. When she left, and I was just mooning around the house, and my mother said, well, don't you see you should have made more than just one friend? And then I guess she realized that was unfair because they did all live out in Spring Glen and stuff like that. And so she said, but all right, she said, you're unhappy now and things aren't going right. She said, but I want to tell you something. Something very good is going to happen to you. I don't know what it is, but it will happen. Well, that was just a pile of bullshit, of course, but I believed it. And I always believed that because good things did happen. You know, we'd go on trips or whatever. And when I tried to analyze years and years later how I felt about death, very sad now, but good things are going to happen. That's the way I feel about death. So it was the right thing to say. She didn't realize how influential she was. Mm-hmm. But so I drew, and then they sent me to boarding school after 8th grade. And we were supposed to go out. My mother was always worried because I didn't go out and go for sports and do all these things. Hated dancing school. Here was this horsey boarding school. So after classes in the afternoon, everyone was supposed to go out and find their assigned mount and put the bridle and the saddle on it and ride all afternoon and take some training in riding in a circle and making the animal obey. Well, that didn't interest me at all. I had a bedroom with a roommate with a big double-decker bed in it, and she slept on top and I slept on the bottom. And when she went out, I got her bedspread and hung it down so that anybody looking in the door of the room wasn't going to see me sitting on that bed drawing, because the headmistress's bedroom was right across the hall, and that was the first thing she saw when she got out of her room was the view in our room. But she figured that out after a while. So at the end of the year, was I going to come back to Gunston? I said, no, I'm homesick. I want to go home. And she said, if you stayed, we'd get you an art teacher. And I said, no, I want to go home. And that was the smartest thing I ever said, because I did not need a teacher to tell me the right way to do art. See, luckily, I was absolutely left alone that way. And it doesn't take much to change a kid's trajectory to the thought that, oh, there's a right way to do art and I'm not doing it. You know, I don't know how many kids have been destroyed because they had some art teacher telling them, well, there was a art teacher in elementary school, an old lady who one day brought in a whole lot of plaster casts of Greek statues, small ones, and we were supposed to draw them. And this was the classical way to learn art, and we all had a big drawing paper and so on. And I remember her coming around and saying, oh dear, you shouldn't have such dark outlines. You need to cross-hatch in the body itself. And I said, And I thought to myself, she doesn't know what she's talking about. Lines is where it's at. And I had these big outlines. Well, they looked like cartoon figures. And so I never was bothered by the idea that I wasn't doing it right. In art school, a little bit, because they were still holding up Cezanne as a wonderful, glowing example of what we ought to aim for, and I never cared for his work. So my mother took a watercolor class when I was in high school and made great friends with a woman who was doing it, who loved art. And while they were painting, they chatted, and my mother was complaining about she had this daughter who just wasn't interested in anything, didn't like dancing, didn't like tennis, didn't like this, that, and the other, didn't want to go to basketball. Well, Letty Pearson was the woman's name, and she said, well, what does your daughter like to do? Oh, all she ever does is draw. Well, Mrs. Pearson said, well, sounds like she ought to go see the Rhode Island School of Design. I think Mom and I were on the train that very week up to Providence. And after that, she decided that was the direction I should be going. And she took me to museums, and I went to Providence my junior year summer and took their exam. And it was a wonderful exam. It didn't have hardly any math or English in it at all. It was all draw this, draw that. And about 6 weeks later, this letter came to my family to say that I had been accepted into Rhode Island School of Design. Of course, not as a scholarship student. That was a whole other thing I didn't have to face. But my family wasn't worried that way, and they were just so glad to get me off their hands and find something that I could do. And my mother said, well, you can take a major in illustration. She was thinking too, down the road I might need to earn a living. Heaven forbid. And so at age 17, I graduated from high school and went that fall to Rhode Island School of Design. And it was 4 of the happiest years I ever spent. It was just a blast. Wonderful. And of course, I did take the illustration major for 1 year, and the teacher was so boring. All he wanted us to do to start with is to make pastiches of other famous illustrators in the past. In other words, to copy their technique. Didn't interest me at all. So I changed my major to painting because I could not. Polly, is she back? I guess so. Couldn't stand the thought of illustrating other people's work. I've written my own stories and illustrated them, but not some. I didn't have the feeling for illustrating other people's work. That was it. And Mom said, well, why did you change your major? And I said, well, Mr. Stein was boring, but what happened was one seminar we had with him, someone asked him, Mr. Stein, how do you actually become an illustrator? And Mr. Stein, and how many of your students do? And he said, oh, about 10%. And he said, they're all the men, of course. The girls all prefer to get married and have a family. And this was 1955. No birth control pill yet, okay? So we were all directed toward marriage, with the idea of a career only being as a desperate second fiddle if the marriage didn't work out. But she wondered why I had rejected illustration. I explained to her that they all were men and only 10% of them. And then someone said, well, how do they do it? How do they become illustrators? And Mr. Stein said, you take your portfolio to New York and show it to art directors. Well, I thought, what? Bother these important men at their desks? Up in a skyscraper somewhere? I can't do that, because they'd hate what I did anyway, I assumed. And so there went the career down the tubes. And if art failed me and family money failed me, then I knew that what I would be a bag lady, and there'd be worse things. It would be kind of amusing if I wasn't too hungry. Yeah.
Not a bad profession.
No, I'd be a bag lady.
But here you are. You make art, you do sell art.
Yeah, it's beginning to, at the age of 84.
Do you think it's taken women longer to be?
Well, a lot of them tried to be like the adventurous men. I'm having trouble with name amnesia, especially at my age, but there's certain ones I think of. The one that did all the plates, and
Judy Chicago?
yeah. Yep. And in a way, what a lot of them do, but this is true with male artists too, is they're making something that's trying to get attention. Basically, they want attention. I mean, back in history, the artists that made it were the people that could paint portraits of popes and stuff like that. And suddenly the camera could do it better. The camera, I guess artists were victims of obsolescence. The modern world took over their industry. I guess that's what the story of the captain of industry is about. Yeah.
Hmm.
I was painting a picture on High Street in Eastport. As you go up the hill toward the high school, there's a rock garden on a slope with kind of steps down, and lots of crazy flowers and a few sculptures of frogs and toads and stuff in there. And I was sitting on the sidewalk with a canvas, I guess it was about 30 by 30, doing a painting of that. I haven't been painting outdoors much in the past, 8 or 10 years, but before that I was doing a lot of it, and I was out there painting, and this young guy was coming down the hill from the high school, and I could hear him saying to himself, but loudly, "I'm sorry, I'm sorry." And he was looking at what I was painting, which looked like a total mess at that point. "I'm sorry." So he was about to go by me, muttering to himself. I said, "Just wait a minute." I said, "What do you know about artists?" I said, "They used to paint realistic paintings, and then the camera came along and ruined their job, so they had to find something fun to do, so they did abstracts. That explains what I'm doing right now." Well, he sort of hunched up and went on and saying, "I'm sorry, I'm sorry." I don't know if I taught him anything.
Is there anything else that you're sort of looking forward to? Or?
Well, I'm going to do something that I wouldn't say I'm looking forward to it in some ways, but I am definitely thinking of doing it because it's something, if I can find what I did with it, that's very powerful in my life right now. My husband was in a nursing home for a while, and he got 20 free days of care, and he'd had a stroke, and so I didn't know how to have him at home without help. And so he had 20 free days. After that, it was going to be over $300 a day. So he was in St. Joe's Hospital, and then he was in the nursing home. Well, one night they called us up. We weren't allowed to visit him either because of COVID. But they called us up and they said, "He isn't doing well. If you want to come in and sit by him, this may be the end." So my daughter Jenny and I went and sat with him. And he'd probably shoot me if he'd known what I was doing, but and I think once I get this out of my system, well, on one of these drawings, maybe this one, maybe this one. This was his bedside table with a picture of me. Hi there, sweet. Did you have a good time? Did you have a good time? Probably this one is sort of going to be, I'm not going to have this and this there, but this bed with this dying man in it, and it's going to be a long horizontal, and his bedside table with his wife's picture, and then the hall out there with a wheelchair and looking into another person's room, and the equipment that you see in a place like that that's pretty stark. And they thought he was going to die then, but we came in and his breathing stabilized and he was okay. So we finally went home. But at the end of his 20 days, which he only had a week left of those 20 days when he was in there, my daughter and her partner and I went and got him out of there. I said, I'm not paying any 300 plus a day for him to be in there. And finally, the doctor signed something to say that he had less than 6 months to live. So that meant I could get hospice. And they came here every day, sometimes twice, and cleaned him and turned him and did all the things I couldn't do. And he lived another week here, and he was so happy to be home. At that point, he was so bad he couldn't hardly talk at all, and he couldn't really smile, but I knew that he was glad to be back. And so we had a week together, and then he died, and it just was the right thing to do, that's all. But I want to do a portrait of a nursing home person with this sort of frivolous background, the portrait, the flowers the people had brought, a cup of something, and these dreadful little things that look like sponge lollipops. You dip it in sweetened water and then put in their mouth and wash around. And of course, they took his dentures out, so he looked like a zombie. But that's going to be a painting. After that, who knows? Something more cheerful, I think. Actually, I felt like I wasn't being able to paint, but I did a lot this year. That was inside Lord Nelson's ship, the kitchen, and it isn't hardly started yet, but there were these dead birds hanging from the ceiling and a great big cutting board looking like a mummy over in the right corner and all their pots and pans. But the wonderful things about those ships is that everything, the perspective is so gaga. I mean, none of it's straight. The walls curve in, and so that's got to wait for a while, but that's a place called Stresa in the Italian Alps near a marvelous lake. And my daughter's room had this view. She had a balcony. Oh my God.
So on all these many and varied trips, what kinds of art materials do you take with you?
Well, I had this great big suitcase, a big fold-up duffel thing with wheels on it. These things are stretchers, or 28-inch stretchers. Mm-hmm. I just took 4 of them. I took a little package of thumbtacks, and I think I had 8 canvases in all, cut to fit those stretchers. And I would stretch one of them, go and paint the place, and at least start it. And then, because they're acrylics, by evening they'd be dry, so I'd take them off the stretcher and put a new canvas on, roll them up. It was a good way to do it.
Awesome. I love it.
you what, I'll just flip through them and you can decide what you want to take and what not, because this was another one of my people in landscape pictures. That's a lady at Biddeford. She's about to go down the steep hill to church, and I call that St. Andrew's Parish. I was sitting there doing a watercolor of it years ago, and this woman came out of a triple-decker. She was putting on her coat and going down the hill, and first her legs disappeared, then her bottom half, then her top half, and finally her head disappeared. It was such a steep hill. And it tickled me, so I ruined the watercolor by trying to put her in at the last minute. And for years I had that, and then I thought, I'm going to do a painting of it when I was taking that figure in landscape thing, and I'm so happy with that painting.